Why do we find bad things funny, and is there a connection between dark humor and shadow integration, or some kind of healing bridge between heavy jokes and trauma healing, or between sarcasm and self-regulation? The answer is obviously yes. Bad things can be funny, and bad moments in life can be made a little bit lighter with a little bit of humor, but you need to be careful with dark humor in particular, because I don't know if you've ever been in a stage of your life before, maybe you're this person, or you know someone who's this person, but the sarcastic individual is very rarely happy deep down. The person who's a black joke junkie is not normally an optimistic, uplifting person to be around, and if you're generally spending a bit too much time in dark humor, it might be damaging your psychological health. And this isn't to say that there isn't a time and a place for a bit of a caustic comment or a sarcastic remark, but you really need to be careful on how often you're dipping into that kind of negativity. Because if we take a moment to address this question again, looking at the humor and the shadow and trying to find a space in between and what's the connection here, you need to look back on your entire childhood, adolescence, and your current adult life. There was a moment on the playground, imagine when you were a little boy or a little girl, when someone fell over and you found it funny. Or when one of your friends made a bullying remark about how the other person had a weird hairstyle, they had a disfigurement in their face, maybe a really fat nose or a really small chin, or maybe they had a big pimple, whatever might have been happening, and you found it funny. Why did you find it funny as a child? Why did it continue to be funny when you became a teenager and someone would slip up in a lesson, they'd stumble over something and you'd mock them and everyone would laugh? Maybe you're saying, oh, I'd never do anything like this, but I guarantee you did. I guarantee there were at least a handful of moments where you got pleasure from someone else's pain. Or at the very least, you became the kind of teenager that I also was at times, where you really enjoyed sarcasm and you thought it made you an intelligent and sophisticated individual, because your teacher would say something and you'd come back with a witty remark that would be all dark, or you'd make some kind of inappropriate adult joke. And this is another kind of side tangent to the dark humor. Of course, adolescents are often thinking a lot about their growing sensuality, so whenever a teacher makes a remark, you often hear, that's what she said, that's what she said, that's what she said, because children, or adolescents in particular, they're projecting their outer reality in a way which is very uncalibrated, and then we actually fall blind to this trap when we become adults. We think that we're being clever, we think that we're being witty, and we think that our sarcasm is a way of connecting with other people, because we, unfortunately, have more of a wounded place inside of us, and we start seeing the world as we are on the inside. Ultimately, it's a classic case of us projecting what's on the inside onto the outside, but you need to be aware of those moments where either you're behaving like a child in terms of finding people slipping over being really funny, or people getting hurt, or people embarrassing themselves, or maybe being on the internet and looking at gossip and drama and one group hating another group, and you might think, well, how does this relate to dark humor? It all goes down to the level of darkness. Fundamentally speaking, dark humor is about spending a bit more time in a negatively oriented version of reality than might be necessary. But this is a nuanced point that we need to really pause and go into, because for someone who's had trauma, someone who's experienced a difficult childhood or a difficult moment in their adult relationship or their career, whatever might be happening, it can be healing and appropriate to have a little bit of a steam release when you're starting to, honestly, feel the pain of the unresolved situation. It can be healing to make a remark. It can be healing to make light of the difficult childhood, or maybe the classic, like you come from a broken home and you're making jokes about how daddy never comes home, and you're just, you're cracking them out here and there, and you're with your friends and someone says, oh, I'm going out, I might be back later, and then you say, well, my dad didn't come back after 15 years, so that kind of humor. Okay, you're healing, but are you actually healing? How many months, how many years? Years especially. If you're spending years with the same kind of dark humor, eating that consciousness, you're not healing a wound, you're repeating the same kind of traumatic pattern over and over again and giving yourself a bit of a nervous giggle here and there. And if you actually look at the bioenergetics of laughter and tears, the ha 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 response is very much a ho 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 ho. If you let the ha 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 up in the cheeks become ho ho ho, down in the chest you start crying. Because it's sad. It's fundamentally sad. And the teenager who's going through all kinds of adolescent identity changes and identity challenges, they go into sarcasm because it's a way of them kind of dealing with the more and more complex reality that they're a part of and dealing with some of the issues that they may be facing in their personal life. The child is a much more simple bullying remark, but the adult, dark humor. If you're really hooked on looking at the evil and the negativity in the world and trying to find a way to make it enjoyable or pleasurable or bearable beyond a certain limit, you're probably trapping yourself in an unconscious pattern where you're just not giving yourself the opportunity to actually see the lighter side of life. I don't know if you've noticed this pattern before, and again, this is my open bias. I try not to be too sarcastic, and I'm not even trying. I'm just generally not that sarcastic. Maybe I'll make a bit of a deadpan joke in one of these videos every now and again, but in day-to-day life, I'm not giving sarcastic energy towards someone because there's that element of cruelty. There's that element of poking, there's that element of like subtle aggression, a bit of a stab, a bit of a remark, and either it's going outwards, either you're stabbing outwards like this, or you have a self-deprecating comment where you stab inwards. And as someone who's trauma-informed and tries to be a generally self-integrated, optimistic individual, me looking back at my past or overly repeating on a certain identity that I had of maybe being more depressive or more dark or more edgy, past the point of that being appropriate and then stabbing myself with that old rusty dagger, it's just not worth it. And it's definitely not worth it to do it towards other people. I don't understand why you'd be a full-grown adult and still enjoy those kinds of jokes, because you're either hurting yourself or hurting someone else. And this is the difference between banter. I'm not trying to be super moralistic. Yes, teasing is fine. Teasing between friends, teasing between lovers. But where's the nuanced moment when a teasing becomes a bullying remark? Because bullying goes back into childhood and adolescent psychology. And if you're thinking that you're flirting with your girlfriend by calling her hair a certain, I don't know, you're insulting her hair or insulting how she speaks, and the reality is you're just being a bit of a prick. It's not funny. You're just a teenage boy. You're not growing out of that wounded place of being confronted by women or not knowing how to relate to women or the girls that are in your class when you're 14. You're hooked on that consciousness. And if you're even, let's say, another example of a woman who's always caught in black humor and you're making jokes about some difficult moments in childhood or something that's going on in relation to your addiction issues or how you're spending your life, and it's this constant flurry of memes that reinforce how miserable your life is, and you get a little kick here and there, you can do so much better. You can do so much better for yourself, and it feels better on the inside. You don't have to give up the ability to make a dark joke at your expense, and occasionally you can see a pretty funny dark meme and get a good kick out of it, but it should be the smaller proportion of your humor. From a trauma healing perspective, everything that you perceive becomes your reality in this ever snowballing loop, and if you start to lock in on a certain way of perceiving the world and reinforcing your self-identity in relationship to the world that you see, the world is, for example, a dark, evil and bleak space, therefore you relate to the world in this dark, heavy energy as well, and you get stuck in that particular self-identity, self-reinforcement pattern. The way to bring yourself out of those depressive, apathetic and otherwise critical states is to not keep giving yourself little injections of humor or little injections of I feel good when I make a self-deprecating comment or I criticize my girlfriend, boyfriend, family member, or laugh at the person on the street. It's obviously not high consciousness. I try and avoid those words, but it's not high consciousness. The friends that I have and some of the clients that I work with who go on their healing journey from more wounded states to more enlightened states. They're not enlightened, but towards that spectrum of being conscious and aware, they become less and less critical with themselves. They become less and less critical with the world, and that means that they just don't find it funny when people are losing. They don't find it funny when someone's suffering. They don't find it funny to engage with the damage and the darkness of the world because they're no longer feeling that on the inside. The funniness of the situation is a way of them making the best of a bad situation that they experienced until the point when the bad situation is no longer being continually triggered or repeated because they've done their deeper trauma work. This is something that I look at in the shadow work library, especially in module 3, where we're looking at the psychology of evil and unconscious hostility dynamics from a collective unconscious level. You can see in the link in the description, it's a unique learning environment. I've just updated the sales page so you can see the full virtual tour, but it's an idea that I can't go into full detail, but this idea of symbiotically creating identities based on good feelings or semi-good feelings. It's basically a reinforcement loop. What you're doing when you're hooked on dark humor is you're reinforcing a worldview on the inside of who you are and how you see the world on the outside. It's not the full picture, but at the bottom line level, how this relates to shadow integration is you're trying to scratch the surface of something that you know is unresolved inside of you, and you can't fully bury it because it's not fully repressed. It just comes out in these waves. Here and there you see a remark, or you see, be more specific, you see a moment where maybe there was a divorce, you see some kind of divorce situation in news, or one of your friends says something and you're a child who suffered a family in divorce, and then of course you make a little remark. Just pay attention to that moment in this example of why there's energy that relates to that. Yes, you literally were a child of divorce, or you literally were a child of an alcoholic mother or father. But that charge, that little push, that little moment where you're hooking into that consciousness, that thought form of divorce or addiction, and then giving yourself a sugary junk food hit of making a joke at either your own expense or the expense of your family member, is it actually healing? Initially, it can make you safe. It can be self-regulation in the form of being in a leaky boat in the ocean and getting the buckets and taking out some of the excess water so you don't sink. But the way to heal the deeper wound, as I've explored at different moments on this channel, is to patch up the wounds in the first place, to repair the holes in the boat, rather than thinking that you're getting a bit of relief by bucketing it out over the side. You need to look deeper, and there's little moments where you're feeling drawn towards dark humor or caustic remarks could be a really good opportunity just into a bit more shadow integration. It's an open-ended question. I would love to see what you think in the comments section. I'm sure that I've irritated a few people who are maybe just not getting what I'm trying to put out there. I'm not saying that you should never enjoy dark humor. It's about proportionality. Really quite a small proportionality, if I'm going to be honest. The healthier and happier and more healed that people get, the less that they enjoy those cruder forms of humor. And actually, interestingly, you kind of turn crude humor to a whole nother level. This is something that I've noticed in my own life and in the world of my clients. You go from like childish bullying remarks, like someone falls over and that's funny, you complete a spiral, and then you almost come back to fart jokes at the higher spectrum. You find it funny when humans do like normal human things, fart jokes, or like silly puns, or people pulling silly faces and being physically humorous without anyone needing to suffer. It's still quite a base level childlike humor, but nobody is getting pain, and we're not confusing pain as being pleasure and playing in that very unconscious dynamic. It's the beginning of a conversation. Leave me a comment down in the comment section. I respond to everything, and again, you can join me in the shadow work library if you want to go deeper into the shadow dynamics of everything behind this conversation. The link is in the description. You can watch the shadow work playlist. There's over 5 hours of shadow work information. The books in this course truly are a one-of-a-kind selection, and it doesn't exist anywhere else on the internet. But I hope you've enjoyed the video nonetheless, and I will see you down in the comment section, and you can feel free to leave your favorite dark humor joke if you want to give this a bit of a chaotic spin and end on a trickster note, because why not?